Hey friends, welcome back to another session of Strong Women of God Bible Studies. Now today is going to be quite different, and in fact the next several weeks are going to be different because I felt like God was really putting it on my heart to share a little bit about one of the areas that I am so passionate about within our faith, which is apologetics. Now, for those of you that have never heard of apologetics is really studying the defense of your faith, so the reasons for what you believe. And we're going to get into all of it today. It is something that is exciting to me, and I just want to say, again, I am not a teacher of this. I am a student, and so what I'm doing is just sharing the things that I have studied along with you. But apologetics is really something that changed my understanding of faith, and in fact actually deepened it. It in no way is meant to supersede your faith or to take the place of your faith. Now, for me, I had a personal encounter with Jesus, and so I knew that Jesus was real because of that personal encounter, and I have continued to know he's real because I have a personal relationship. But what apologetics did was it kind of gave me a framework for all of those intellectual questions that I had that couldn't quite get answered just because I had a relationship with Jesus. So for me, understanding the reasons for why I believe what I believe and being able to answer some of those tough questions has really helped to deepen my faith, and it's helped me to be able to share my faith with others as well. So we are going to get into it in just a moment, but I have a few questions for you, and what I want you to do is actually answer them. So I'm going to ask the question, and you're going to pause the video and grab a journal and actually write out these answers. The more that you actually wrestle with this, as opposed to just listening to me talk, I think the more transformational it will be. So let's get into it. My first question is, how do you determine what's true at current? Go ahead and pause the video. Welcome back. So, how do you determine what's true? Type it in the comments. Let me know. Now, if you were anything like me before I was saved, I would have said that I know something is true because I just feel it in my gut. And I know when something's not true because I feel it in my gut. That's very based on emotions. Some of you might say, well, I knew something was true because someone I trusted, who had authority maybe, said it was true, and I believed it was true. Others of you might have said, well, I know something is true because of my experience with it. I experienced something, I know it's true. So my second question is, well, how does culture define truth? If you were to really look around, look at the media, look at the news, look at adults, teenagers, children, how are they defining right now in this kind of world of chaos? How do they determine what is true? Welcome back. I'm going to go over that answer in just a moment, but I have another question for you. Is truth always absolute? Go ahead and pause and think about that. Welcome back. So what'd you get? Is truth always absolute? One of the things that I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this too, is that our culture is in this weird place, and the place is called moral relativism. That ideology basically means that there is no real truth, that everyone has truth. Now, if you would have asked me this question before I got saved, I would have said, nope, truth is not absolute. There's different sides to every story. There's no way for sure that we can tell anything. It was an exhausting way to live, particularly because although I said that, in reality, there were so many things that I believed that were absolutely true. So actually, I was just living a really inconsistent lifestyle. There were things that I believed that should not happen, right? And there were things that I believed that were evil, and I believed that everyone would think that they were evil. But then that would mean that truth, there is some kind of truth that is absolute. Now, after I got saved, I was really challenged because from a biblical perspective, there is such a thing as an absolute truth, and that absolute truth is the Word of God, right? So what does this mean? It means that what he said was true, is true, and will always be true. It is unchanging. Let's take a look at a couple of verses that will say that. Jump to Malachi 3:6, or Psalms 25:10, or Psalms 89:14, or Psalms 90 verse 2, or Psalms 117 verse 2, or Psalms 119, 142. There are a bunch of different scriptures that kind of come up with the same pattern and that come up with the same theme, right? Which is that truth is unchanging. that God spoke a truth and that he is unchanging. And so what that means is that there is a truth with a capital T. Now we just have to do a better job at 1, finding it, or 2, accepting it. So let's come back to this idea of apologetics. I mentioned earlier that apologetics is the reasons for what you believe. It's a defense, right? And so it is a defense that we believe by showing the content of the gospel is backed up both by evidence and sound reasoning. Now, when I was an undergrad, I studied, I minored in law and policy. And so I am a sucker for good, logical, clear explanations of things. And so apologetics satisfies that little need of me. And so what I love is that apologetics takes us through a step-by-step journey of understanding what could potentially be the actual truth. We see that this is a good space for us to engage in because in 1 Peter 3:15, Paul writes and he says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." And so we see here that Paul is instructing in his letter that we should be prepared to have an answer. In the Greek, that word is apologia, which apologetics comes from. So we should be prepared to have a defense for our faith. Again, if you jump to Jude, chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people." Right? So to contend with, right? To fight with, to struggle, to wrestle with, right? Or to defend. And that's what apologetics seeks to do. It seeks to defend. Now, I know some of you might have objections, or you've even heard things like this growing up saying, well, God doesn't need a defense. And that's true. We're not defending God by any means. We are defending our faith, though, and in a way with gentleness and kindness. And honestly, I think it just helps you be more in awe of God when you realize that he has actually given us some answers for these difficult questions. So let's go back to the larger idea of apologetics. What it really seeks to do is answer 3 central questions. The first of those questions is, does God exist? Right? And this will talk about evolution and creationism and what actually was possible within that span of time. The second question is, well, if God does exist, right, what kind of God is he? And so this answers questions like, well, is he a good God? Is he a loving God? Is he a personal God? Why, if there is a God, why is there hell? Why would God send people to hell? Send people. We'll talk about that in a different session. But apologetics really does grapple with those tough questions. And the third question it seeks to answer is like, well, if God does exist, how may I know him? Right? How may I know him? And this kind of talks about salvation. How many paths are there to God? And so I think it answers some heavy hitter questions that are so important for where we are in our time right now. Folks, people need Jesus and they need to understand their faith and not be rocked by the current times, which tell you that left is right and that right is left. And I think that apologetics does a good job of this. I'm interested to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever doubted God's existence? And if you believe in God, why do you believe in him? And what are some reasons that you've heard that people don't believe in God? Right? And so all of those 3 questions over the next few weeks, we're going to be exploring them. So please do leave comments so that I know where I can pick up and direct specific topics that you might be interested in. Now, I want to end on this. There is a difference between an atheist and an agnostic. And we've heard those 2 things sometimes interchangeably, but they are a bit different. The atheist believes that there is no God, right? There is no God, and they know with an absolute positivity that there is no God. Now, there's a problem in that line of thinking, which is that they must be omniscient, right? Which is an attribute only of God. They must know everything about the entire universe and everything that could potentially happen to make such a claim as there is no God, right? So if we're dealing with an atheist, we have to first ask them, are they omniscient? And if they say no, then there is a little bit of room there for the possibility that God might exist. It's just outside of their understanding, right? Atheist is also an attempt to turn humans or make humans into gods. And so we say things like God doesn't exist because it then gives us permission to be gods ourselves. It gives us permission to make up the rules ourselves. It gives us permission to satisfy whatever desires we want, whether good, bad, or evil, without any type of repercussions, or so we think. The real world doesn't actually respond that way, but it is the thought process. Agnosticism, on the other hand, says, well, there may be a God or there may not be a God. There's just not enough evidence to figure it out. And I have a problem with that, because agnosticism to me is a little bit lazy. And I'm sorry for saying that word, but it is. There's so much information. There's so much evidence out there. And with this particular concept, if it is true, if what the Christian claims are true, that Jesus is the only way to salvation, this is the biggest decision you will ever make in your life. And we spend so much time on other types of decisions as women, as men. We think so much, and we spend so much time figuring out what kind of house we're going to buy or what kind of car we're going to buy. We do so much research on learning about our potential spouse, right? And the amount of time that we spend. But none of those decisions actually carry into eternity. Our faith and what we believe is the only thing that weighs out into eternity. It carries the weight of life and death. So I urge you, no matter what it is that you believe or that you say that you believe, that you actually put in the work to understand the ins and outs of it, that you would test it, that you would test it and test it and test it. I know that when I was younger, I was in a space of trying to hold on to any little bit of good that I could. And so I grabbed a little from this religion, I grabbed a little from that religion, I grabbed a little from this religion, and I was living in this confused hodgepodge of religions, and I felt like I knew things, but in reality, I hadn't actually studied anything very deeply at that point. However, it was when I turned the corner and started to study very deeply what I said I believed that I started to begin to find the holes in the lifestyle I was currently living in. It did not add up once tested. And I've done the same now with Christianity, and time again, it stands up to the test. And so I'm excited to share with you about apologetics and hopefully give you some of those answers to those tough questions that you might have, or at least a place to start digging into those tough questions. Hope that you're just as excited as I am. Leave some comments in the note. And hey, I wanted to give you a couple of announcements. Follow us on our Instagram account at strongwomen_of_God. We just started a new segment there on Mondays called 7 Sips, and it's just a time of reflection there that can only be found on our Instagram stories. So take a second to follow us on IG. And also subscribe to a YouTube channel that helps us kind of continue to grow and send messages to people. Hey, I am going to be praying for you, and if you have any questions or thoughts about this, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will see you next time. Take care.